my name is John Brindle. I'm going to be hosting today, and I am a PhD student, part of cohort 14 at Lancaster's e-research and TEL program. I'm at thesis stage, and it is long, and it's taking me a long time. Longer than I thought, but it's all good. I'm also a learning design manager at Edge Hill University, which is in Ormskirk in the northwest of England. We are joined by some of the program team from the e-research and TAL program and the PhD programs at educational research in Lancaster. But today we are joined by our very special guest, Dr. Louise Drumm. And now I have some history with Louise Drumm. Louise supervised me on my master's program. I did the MSc in blended and online education at Edinburgh Napier University, which I was very grateful for her tutorship on that program. So I'm really excited to hear Louise talk about her history today and her journey as a researcher. So Dr. Louise Drumm is Associate Professor in Digital Education in the Department of Learning, Teaching and Enhancement at Edinburgh Napier University. And I'm really happy to pass on. I did say I'm her biggest fan today, so that's what we'll do today. I'll be the fan. So without further ado, Louise, I'd like to hand over to you and let you get started.
Thank you so much, John, for that lovely introduction, and thank you for inviting me. I know I'm in an illustrious group of people who've spoken to TEL researchers, so I'm really grateful for that. Oh, hey Sue. So I suppose it's kind of difficult when people ask you about your journey into research, because we're never sitting as a 6-year-old thinking this is what I want to do with my life. So I'm going to jump around a little bit. I'm going to play a little bit with time here, but I'm also kind of going to explore stuff around timelines and how that affects us, and how what's going on in the world has a deep meaning of impact, on our work as well. So I'm aware that I know a couple of you, but there's lots of you I don't know. I do have my email there. If you want to follow up with me about anything at all, you're more than welcome to get in contact. And contact is something, and making connections is something I'm going to speak to a little bit, because it is massively important as researchers to be in contact with each other. So I'm going to start to make myself look good with some French philosophy. Deleuze and Guattari's work on the rhizome theory in particular, was quite influential for me during my PhD, and still is in relation to how I think about things and how I think about our technology and our relationships with technology. And one of the images that they use, or concept around explaining the rhizome, is a map. So a map doesn't have a set path that you have to follow. You can enter and exit at any point, and it's not a tracing, so it's not prescribed. The idea that we have kind of career trajectories, I would say, is disputable. That there is no such thing as a trajectory. We have quite subjective experiences of things, and I'm going to start in the middle. So where I'm starting here is me. So this is 2017, and I'm all dressed up, and I've got a hairdo, and I'm going for a job interview. And I was a job interview in an institution who had approached me a year before to say, might be a job opening up. If you're interested, we'd really like you to apply. So in my mind, I was thinking, there's a job that I could get here. So this would have been my first job that involved research in digital education. The crux is I was just at the end point of my PhD. And it was a very influential point for me, because it really gave me the drive to finish my PhD, because I knew this job was coming up. And I bombed the interview and I didn't get the job. And there's lots of learning I can take from that. I'm still reflect on it and so on. But the point is in 2007, I'd applied to the same institution for a job, and I didn't get that job either. Now, that was in learning technology. So I suppose when I kind of look at various timelines and patterns of things that happened, had I got those jobs, things would have been different. I would have moved country. I would have been in a different place. My children would have different accents. There's a whole lot riding on certain things that happen within our histories. And that was one where something didn't happen for me, and I'm still trying to process that and understand the impact that that has. And sometimes we have to admit that, the impact can be quite devastating. And I'm sharing this because I particularly like this book. I'm not going to be sharing lots of books, but this book talks about, as academics or researchers, the need for us to talk to each other about anxieties, displacements, and failures. And rather than presenting ourselves as overachieving, writing robots whom most systems of assessment seem designed to reward. So I'm not a robot. I've got plenty of failures, and I'm going to talk to those as much as anything else today to try and normalize that, I guess. And lots of other people do this too, and I get lots of inspiration from other people about doing this. So my life has included a lot of this, a lot of looking for jobs. I'm not going to tell you the number of jobs I applied for after my PhD and didn't get, or didn't even get to an interview stage, but because I know that's sensitive and we're in a difficult climate at the moment, but there is of necessity a lot of this grunt work behind getting into a position where you can feel like you can make that impact and you can contribute to research. So this is kind of a smorgasbord of my work history, and it's a little bit checkered in that I've done things like I've been a bagel baker in Vancouver, I've been a postie, I've been a clean water campaigner in Chicago, I've been a software programmer, but I've also worked for several years in theatre as a technician and as a director and a producer as well. So I've got a lot of sort of weird strings to my bow. But why digital education? And I suppose when I think about the two words within that, an education technology or technology enhanced learning, I'll come back to the terms that we use. There's education on the left. So it's a slow moving beast. In terms of research, it's got a curious relationship with research on itself. And I know some of you might be working not in HE, you might be in FE or other parts of education sector. So we have this very slow moving thing that, sort of analyzes, and especially in higher education, analyzes other things externally, not necessarily great at analyzing or researching itself. And then we've got technology. Now, I first work is the wrong word. I first kind of explored technology as a child, and then I took a couple of decades off. It wasn't quite as long ago as the 50s, but technology in that time changed, and technology changes quite quickly, and our engagement with technology is quite fast, and technologies often have these affordances that make us engage with them faster or make us give us a weird relationship with time. So my overarching theme here is around time. So we've got these two difficult things working together: education, slow, impoverished, driven by particular values, we hope, and then technology that's this got an external life outside of education which influences education. It moves fast, or it pretends that it moves fast, and we've got this really interesting space that we're working in. And I think that's kind of what's kept me interested, and that's what makes me quite excited for the future in terms of where you as a group or as individuals can take research and education technology in the future. So when I think about education technology itself, I break it down into practice and research, and we move across those lines, in that line in the middle, quite fluidly. But I think for me, sometimes there's a discomfort there. So if I think about the things that happen within the practice of education technology, so I worked as a learning technologist. You had to be very pragmatic. You had to be very kind of on the ball in terms of dealing with people's hopes and fears and their understanding and identity in relation to technology, and what was possible. You had to work within the boundaries of what was available, particularly if you're working within a single institution. There's a range of drivers behind that, and sometimes they're not always visible. Obviously, there's pedagogy, there's student, there's inclusion, there's all these aspects, and there's the legal aspect as well, and the quality assurance aspect of all the things that we do within with learning technology or technology enhanced learning. But it's also highly monetized So again, there's external companies and vendors and so on that are making money from education through this. And finally, then money makes the decisions. So learning technology is a huge part of our infrastructure, of our institutions. And I'm always conscious that the decisions that are being made about technology and what we use aren't necessarily having relationships with other parts of our understanding about education technology. Yeah, there are tons of systems that are free. Yeah. And actually, I'll come back to that when I come to the timeline. Research. So we've got decades of theorization of technology, going back over 100 years. Fantastic work that we can draw upon about our understanding of technology, the social shaping of technology, and so on. We've also got this very rich strand of education research, how we theorize that, how we think about learning, how we think about teaching, how we think about it in a kind of a global way. And over, I guess, the past 20 years or so, things like critical digital pedagogy has come forward, and pedagogies, it is really plural. And there's been different sort of, maybe you could call them schools of thought within particular contexts. There's work that's come out of the States around digital pedagogies, critical digital pedagogies, and equality and social justice. Similarly, there's parallel stuff being done in the UK. There's also global work as well. Fantastic work being done in critical digital pedagogies, particularly from a global perspective and from an inclusion perspective. And I think just within this, there's this idea that, we can critique everything. And I suppose when I find myself between these two sides, I'm not sure how much those sides are talking to each other. So within practice, that pragmatic aspect of getting stuff up and running, within, getting systems, getting people trained, getting students onto the systems and engaging in a way that's meaningful for their learning. How much of that is actually being informed by research? It is possible to do a lot of that, and I've done it myself without thinking too much about research. But also maybe, and this could be contentious, I think perhaps some research, maybe not recent stuff, but some research has been a little bit blind to the pragmatic aspect as well, in terms of actually, when you are really critical of stuff, you still have to work in these institutions that have got these systems and tools. We don't actually have full agency to be able to choose everything. Now, there are things that are free, indeed, but more and more systems are being locked in to institutions, and licenses and subscriptions as well. So that period of things for free, if you're in the position to I suppose make the decision that that the institution can use those tools, that's one thing. So I last night I just drew this very messy map of how I kind of interacted between these two things. I definitely started from a pragmatic side as a learning technologist, and that was one of the things for me that I started to read a little bit and realized that there was a rich seam of lots of education stuff, but there was nothing that spoke directly to me about how I could think about what I was doing. Working with academics, working on, either delivering online content or developing online content, or just that kind of wider piece of what happens in those digital spaces. And then kind of bringing that back and forth. So crossing over that line between, the theorization of technology, the theorization of education, bringing those things together. I never kind of made it to the point where I make decisions about technology within any institution I've lived in. I've definitely not held purse strings. And I suppose, the monetization, the surveillance capitalism and so on is something that's kind of something that's arisen, I guess, in the past 10 years. So I have a Miro board, and instead of me just kind of talking through stuff, I'm going to actually just give you edit access to it. But just before I do that, I'm going to just kind of describe how it works. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This is a kind of a timeline from, and this is highly subjective. This is my experience. It's also not terribly accurate. So it's me kind of dumping down a few ideas of things that were happening at the time. So under technology and world and political events, from about 1995, with not an awful lot, you know, to my knowledge. Well, there was lots happening, but I suppose the things that were kind of really foundational was things like BBC website being launched. And then this kind of phase was a sort of term as a sort of foundation phase of technology and kind of the more socialization of technology widely. Google obviously launched in the late 90s, similar with Napster. And then we have things like the Freedom of Information Act is something that came along around that time. Moving on just past 2000, we have a lot more things happening. There's this real peak of activity in this decade where we have Wikipedia, Creative Commons, obviously a huge influence on open education practices, .com crash, so the first kind of trough of disillusionment, if you like, Skype, RAP Skype. That was something that started that idea of being able to do what we're doing now. Blogs and wikis started to come along at this point. And of course, the launch of Facebook, but of course it wasn't publicly available until after 2005. And also similarly, YouTube coming along at the same time. We've also got the Special Education Needs and Disability Act, which had provisions around online access as well and considerations for that. I had forgotten about this until I actually started Googling a few things, that there was a big debate around just after 2005 in the UK around ID cards and digital records of people. So there was a growth of ideas of around surveillance and what the state had information on you and so on. But of course, at the same time, people were signing up to things like Twitter and Facebook and giving data away for seemingly free services. And then along came the kind of the mobile idea around iPhone, that integrated device, the device with photograph potential, and then Android followed along afterwards, and iPad. The Arab Spring was something that has been held up as one of the kind of laudable aspects around social media and social networking, that this was something that kind of proved that sort of initial positive phase about technology was actually democratizing. It was a democratizing force, right? And an enabler of democracy across the world. So this idea that the web is open and that we can access and everybody has an equal voice. This was a real utopian stage. And the kind of Web 2 read-write web was influential very much within education as well. And that's where the idea around open tools and stuff came along. And then we move into the 2010s. A very important piece of legislation, the Equality Act, came through there as well, very influential. And then we have the start of some things like Vine, but also Snapchat, amazingly still going. I don't know how it's still going, but it is still going with an awful lot of users. I think it's on 1 billion users per quarter at the moment. And then we get into cloud stuff, so more kind of online collaboration, not just discussion boards, but actually live working and things like Google Docs and cloud things. But we're starting to see the cracks open a bit around Snowden, the leaks around Snowden. Again, the democratizing force of social media, particularly hashtags like Black Lives Matter, and that consciousness raising, that kind of the rise of sort of the activism, but also the spaces where that activism is happening as well is quite interesting. And then we get into, you know, the more sort of other types of hardware like Alexa and Raspberry Pi. So, and I've arbitrarily kind of defined these phases, you know, to cut off from the start for these phases quite arbitrarily here. So you can sort of see sort of 2015, Brexit and Trump, that the sort of real impact of online and social media at a kind of a global and a political and democratic way. And of course, it was around 2016, 17 when we learned more about Cambridge Analytica and how that was impacting the voting in the previous years. 2018, I remember it well, GDPR. Everybody was rushing around furiously to try and get everything ready for GDPR, and it still has a significant impact in the way that we work with tools and that we work with personal data. And it also has repercussions for further legislation, particularly in the EU, but then that also has an impact on the technologies coming out of the States. And then, you know, in the last kind of period before 2020, whatever happened then, things like TikTok and the emergence of that, and how TikTok had a shaping influence on how other older social media was presenting content. So when you think about Instagram Reels and Facebook, and how Facebook has gone through various kind of iterations of where its focus is. But yeah, all that time, the idea around surveillance capitalism and what that impact was having on us and our students and our decisions around technology, that kind of became more mainstream at that point. And then 2020 happened, and we were just all online all the time, and threw caution to the wind to what spaces we were working in, because we were scrabbling around so quickly. But then we look at, obviously the spaces that those democratizing spaces had slowly been sort of, I guess, poisoned by various things. Humans, of course, for a start, but also bots and apparently state actors as well. So, over the past few years, you can see, obviously, we've had ChatGPT and other companies rushing to kind of catch up with that. But also we've had the Online Safety Act in the UK as well. It has an impact around how companies can store data and share data potentially with law enforcement agencies or the government. So I'm going to go back up to the other side and then kind of say, I haven't filled in the left side very much, but I just want to kind of give a broad overview of what I was thinking at the same time there. So in terms of research and then education technology itself, and this is where I'm going to ask you all for help, because I want you to start filling in some stuff here about your experiences and about what was happening. Education technology is hard to pinpoint in the timeline because, WebCT launched, I don't know, I think it was around 2000 in Canada, and then the adoption of that was a slow burn, and the idea of when the VLE started is a slow burn. So we have this again, this disjoint between what's happening in some places, not happening in other places. What becomes common practice itself is actually quite interesting. I just kind of give a shout out for Research and Learning Technology Journal, which had previously been called Alt-J. So that was around 1993 when that started. Then looking at other things that were happening around that time. So obviously Julie Salmon's work was one of the a highly influential pieces of work very early on when we think about it. It was the year 2000, e-moderating. Laura Lard, similarly, the conversational framework and how influential that's been. That's something that sits, I think, just in 2002. So again, when we think back over the past couple of decades, if you're interested more in some of this stuff, I'd recommend you read a book by Martin Weller on, I think it's 25 years of ed tech. But again, this is my highly subjective piece here. Blackboard kind of I can't say most, that sort of institutions taking on VLE was sort of happening around this period, and I'm happy for any of you to disprove me or of this point, but there was kind of a more mainstreaming of a centralized VLE. Which is interesting because when I started working in the University of the West of England around 2002, and I had an e-learning officer job. They didn't quite know what to do with me, but that was my job. And we didn't have a VLE. And I was struggling to think about the kinds of things we did. It was very much around file sharing and things like that. So yeah. Then we get into more kind of, there's a period here of 10 years, say, between 2000 and 2010, where there was more theorization happening. And there was there's quite a dip then in what was happening in terms of theorization of what's happening. So we have things like Siemens connectivism, lots of work being done around things like that. You'll see in the next one, moving down between 2005 and 2010, we have Beetham and Shark's work looking at rethinking learning for a digital age, and that's an edited volume that's been got more than one edition. Gráinne Knoll, obviously hugely influential in this space as well, thinking about contemporary perspectives in e-learning, and Martin Oliver as well. Garrison and Vaughan. Now, Garrison and Vaughan, that was just one selected one, but obviously they had done previous work as well on blended learning around 2000, I think. And then David Wiley's work on open education resources and the sustainability of OER. So the kind of movement around open education was really kind of gaining pace at this point, and you can see in 2010 OER 10, that was the first OER conference. And again, shout out for OER 25, which is happening in London next month. And I'm a co-chair in that. And I recommend if you're looking for a conference to go to, it's a really friendly conference to come to. So please do register. And then we have Martin Oliver's looking at technological determinism, again, bringing more theoretical, sociological perspectives on technology in as well. In terms of things that were happening, I was trying to think about stuff. Lecture capture kind of came in more prevalently during this time. And similarly, obviously the MOOC, the year of the MOOC, but they had, and, connectivist MOOCs and XMOOCs and so on had a kind of it's really kind of hit the ground running about that point, although they'd been going for a couple of years, but they hit the mainstream. Looking at other things like Neil Selwyn's work, so education and technology, he's done a lot of work around this stage, bringing in more critical perspectives. Similarly, the work of Sean Bain and colleagues, that much more critical perspective than this. And when we look at what's happening on the other side, this is where we're kind of getting into the Snowden leaks, where we're getting into Black Lives Matter, we're getting into, we're still in I suppose a kind of a very positive, perhaps pipey way of thinking about social media, digital technologies. Facebook wasn't the baddie at that point, I don't think. Or some people always knew it was the baddie. But for the rest of us, Facebook wasn't the baddie. Okay. So in some ways, the kind of the critical digital pedagogies work that's been done by these authors here, was speaking to stuff, maybe early warning signs about things that were happening, but maybe not mainstreamed in our understanding. And then obviously moving up to kind of the more surveillance capitalism and how others have taken that on, particularly Ben Williamson's work around big data and education and how influential that has been. And all through this, of course, there's people like Audrey Waters talking about big tech, big ed tech, and some of the really, fallacies, I suppose, that can be promoted through ed tech. And as, thinking back to the pragmatic, the practice-based aspect of learning technology versus the research side of it, again, there's that tension between how do we manage the difficulties with some of the things we now know about these technologies in relation to how we are using or promoting them for use with students. More stuff kind of happened in the mainstream. The A-level algorithms protests that happened around 2021, where there was, a kind of a realization that decisions were being made automatically, not by humans, on young people's futures. I can't really place where sustainable ed tech came, where it kind of hit a little bit more, but there was a report around that time from JISC, and then there's been work done by Neil Selwyn since around degrowth in digital education in particular, and what that might look like. Very interesting work. And then that lovely word, high flex. So, I've on the black bars on the left, I've kind of put a few kind of words in and how I think they've changed in my experience. So very much starting from, computer assisted learning in the 90s, then moving to, I guess, thinking about e-learning and how we used to put E in front of everything. And then moving into technology enhanced learning has had a very long kind of history and is still going. And then when we look at the way maybe jobs are described as well, learning designer is something that seems to have has kind of gained more. And it's really interesting to me that has an implicit digital technology aspect to it. And you can, again, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but I think that's usually the case. But yeah, so that's kind of a sort of a quick overview of that. Anything from the chat, John, that you want to call my attention to?
No, I think Sonia made a really good point that I responded to as well about, hype cycles and bubbles we've been through, that there's been so many of them. That perhaps missing from here is the big data to machine learning to Gen AI hype bubble, and that I think we're currently still in.
Definitely. Yeah, and it's learning analytics. I was kind of thinking, where would your learning analytics sit here? Because like if you go back over the Horizon reports, they're really, really interesting because you can see, AI was talked about years ago, and machine learning and how all that kind of dashboards and and what data we are collecting from students, and all of that, where all of that sits. I think it's really interesting. Your studio. There's so much missing, isn't there? I could just make this enormous. Second Life. How could I have missed out Second Life? That's a real oversight on my part. I actually did a little bit of research and kind of colleague training in Second Life around 2007, 8. Fascinating to see how VR has taken off now, particularly around the hardware, and what exactly that means. Augmented reality, wearables. I think obviously there's I guess Wall Street sees that there's a future in wearables, isn't there? Because there's a lot of investment going on around that at the moment, particularly in wearables and artificial intelligence.
I keep seeing adverts for Ray-Ban, and Meta have got new glasses where you can kind of ask. It's not great for a glasses wearer like me because they're not prescription, but where you, I think it's, oh, what's his name? The guy who plays Thor in the Avengers movies. And they're stood saying, "Oh, what's this skeleton that I'm looking at?" and things like that. And it's really interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, so the Snapchat glasses as well, and yeah, I think the Ray-Ban ones. So curious that Meta is doing this work around uh, VR as well, and augmented reality, I should say, because one of the things I was thinking about that I should have added here as well is Google Glasses and where that sits. All the things that Google made that no longer really are supported, and one of the things around that was about thinking about Google Plus and that as kind of a more professional social networking, but also Google Wave and how exciting that was. That would have been around 2013, 14. So that idea of having live collaborative documents where you could actually see people talking to each other and interacting. Incredibly interesting as kind of creating that space that could be a learning space or a research space. How many hype cycles? Yeah, Sonia. And bubbles. Yeah. Big data. Yeah, that's right. We're always in the middle of some hype cycle. And that's where the critical digital pedagogies come in quite helpful because we've got this rich uh, trove of research and understanding around this, and we have tools to be able to analyze what's happening now. And I guess I'm interested as well about what's going to happen in the future. Can we learn from this timeline to kind of predict what might be happening or what we should be researching? Oculus, yes. The big Meta rebrand. Yeah. DALL-E, yeah. Yes, I think it was kind of think about image generation and generative AI as a sort of a separate thing because I know it doesn't work in a different way in terms of the technical behind it, but in terms of actually what that means for us, and of course the integration of these tools into lots of our learning technology tools. I mean, particularly thinking about Adobe, but Canva and so many things. Um, I promised myself I wouldn't talk too much about generative AI on this because I'm a little bit sick of talking about it. Super, thanks. So we can see, yeah, Outlook launched Windows 98. Moodle launched in 2002. That's right. Joomla, that's a word I haven't heard in a while. Yeah. Open Broadcaster software. Good. Google Data Studio. Lovely. Microsoft Teams launched in 2017, and I think they kind of really pushed out to education institutions around 2019, just in time. Yeah, and I think this is implicit in what I was talking about earlier. The community transition to other spaces like Blue Sky and Mastodon, and to a lesser extent Threads. But that kind of displacement, a few people have written about that. Quite interesting, about that displacement from Twitter, academic Twitter, education technology Twitter. Now I joined Twitter. It was 2007, and for the first 5 years at least, it was actually a very ed tech space. That I was in, but it was also a global space as well. So it was quite different as a space. Adlet as a community space. Yeah, very good. Techno-feudalism, the capture of web. Yep. By 5 or 6 huge tech giants. And I think that's kind of where we're at. There's been this funnel where we've started from a very wide number of tools and ideas and access, and things have been slowly funneled into these very large, very powerful companies that, some of them have, the economies of countries. So yeah, DeepSeek as well, and how regulation is happening in those spaces as well, or not, and what powers governments, and the EU in particular has been quite proactive in this, and how governments do that, and then how that impacts us in terms of education spaces as well. I'm going to leave that for you to keep playing with, and I'd encourage you to keep adding to it. You can see it afterwards as well. And I'm just going to give the last couple of slides that I want to go through. Moments to change things. In 2011, I was a learning technologist, and the very lovely Keith Smythe and lovely Sheila McNeil were running a workshop in my institution, and it was about being a digital scholar. And this was around the book by Martin Weller, a great book. And I remember sitting there, and I had a non-research role, and I realized that apart from Sheila and Keith, I was the only person in the room who'd read that book. And I remember thinking, that's interesting. I kind of know a bit about this, but the people who were talking were people who maybe did not know so much. Moving back a few years before that, 2005, I was in University of the West of England as an e-learning support officer, and I was asked to look at classroom clickers. No mobile phones at that point. People were used for that, and I remember thinking, maybe I'll look up the internet to see if I find anything about this. And I found some research papers. So I actually was the first time I kind of thought, oh, there's a connection here between these things. And what happened was that I discovered that if I took those papers back to academics, they listened to me more. So it was very beneficial, but it was a little bit of a light bulb moment. This book has influenced me a lot. It's Making Us Connected by David Gauntlet. Everyday creativity refers to a process which brings together at least one active human mind and the material or digital world. The activity of making something which is novel in that context, and is a process which evokes the feeling of joy. And I think joy is something that's been spoken about in a lot of spaces, particularly in open education spaces over the past 10 years, but also temper that with, disclosing things, being vulnerable, those tensions between that and maybe, consciousness of privilege and trauma-aware approach to education as well. But I find this book has got 2 different editions. The 2018 one is quite different to the original one because of that period of time from 2010 onwards and what was happening with technology. And he acknowledges that actually not all technology is terribly helpful, or that we do great things about it. So that idea around creativity, obviously from a theatre background, I'm thinking about creativity and how we all contribute to creativity, but how that can be at a small scale and how that might apply in education. I had one of those light bulb moments in that room during my PhD, where I reread a paper I had read several times before, and I suddenly twigged something, and that was actually around theoretical perspectives that I could use. I was told that would happen, and I didn't believe anybody that would happen, but it did take rereading of something for me to twig, actually, this is a theoretical model that I could use. That was in 2015. This submit button is around a failure I had in applying for a job again. Not that I didn't get the job, I didn't actually apply for it. I never clicked the submit button. And it was an internal job. Again, that would have been one that would have had a research aspect to it, but I messed up. So again, things that didn't happen. And that spurred me to think, well, I can see where things are going. Probably a PhD is what I need to do. And then 2020 happened.
Yeah, it's great. Thank you, Louise, for sharing that journey with us, and the really interesting Miro as well. I'm going to open the floor, really. Does anybody, if you feel free to put a question in the chat or ask a question if you want to put your hand up and ask a question. And yeah, somebody's saying, yeah, thanks, that was fun. Great to see the overview. Really interesting to see how things are changing. Again, just talking about the hype cycles and things like that in the chat as well. Very insane. Really enjoyed this. So many things that you're saying resonate. So so you alluded to a bit of an aha moment with reading a paper there. So can you tell us a little bit more about like that aha moment that you
That was that was a paper I had read already a couple of times, but it was I was, I guess, in that part of my PhD where I was writing, trying to think about my methodology and how to justify my methodology and the philosophical underpinnings of it. And there were certain things like actor network theory that just weren't kind of ringing true for me at that time, because I was thinking quite broadly. And what I did, what I read at that point was about rhizome theory and about that sort of subversion of the rhizome. So the rhizome is the idea of plant, which is a weed, which doesn't grow up like a tree. It can grow underneath the ground, and it can break off and regrow and lie dormant, and all of these things that just have this dynamism to it. But it also has been used a lot in education research around, I guess, resisting structures or aligning with structures. It's not quite an either or. It's like we move through these structures and we move through technology. This is my perspective. We move through technology as in this dynamic way where we kind of go along prescribed pathways, but then we kind of break off. But one of the things around my research was around how people were using digital technologies for teaching, so specifically lecturers, and thinking about how some of them were kind of using stuff in ways that was quite subversive. And that, again, was during that 2010, 2020 sort of time frame where things were possibly a little bit more open, things possibly weren't so locked down. They were able to do things with students that perhaps IS services or their IT help desk would not approve of, but they were kind of getting away with it. So yeah. And I've like I said, I've published a paper recently on a chapter on rhizome theory as well. So if you follow my LinkedIn profile, you'll probably find it there. I should have all my links. How rubbish am I? I'm not promoting myself well enough. But yeah, that's how that kind of came about. It's whatever helps you think.
That's really interesting. Yeah, and Kathy's just said rhizome theory is so interesting as well. How much, and I know that there is an answer to this because I attended a workshop that you ran. How much has your kind of theatre background influenced your kind of research practice and what you do?
Um, I think well, I think there's a couple of things. One of the things is always being aware of your audience, and who you're speaking to, and I think that's always kind of been fundamental, and that's quite obvious in a way. And at a facetious level, I've met friends recently who I used to work with, and they said, well, uh, working with academics. Well, having worked with actors, that must be very useful to be able to work with academics. Um, and I think, I suppose what theatre does, it works in a very short time frame. So, you have like 4 weeks, maybe 6 weeks if you're lucky, of intensive rehearsals, and then a couple of weeks of performances, and that all over. It can be all done and dusted within 2 months. And it's quite it's a very intensive period of time, but it's also a very productive period of time. You have to solve problems very fast because you only have access to your rehearsal room or your theatre for a very short period of time. So I suppose in terms of like getting stuff done, it's made me a kind of getting stuff done kind of person. But I've had to extend my kind of ability to not sprint but marathon through the length of an academic term or an academic year more. So that's quite a disjoint as well. But yeah. Oh, thanks, Kathy. Yeah, yeah. And I suppose that the thing that I would say is around the kind of the informal places that I have found networks. And this is a brilliant network, for example. But the open education community was a network for me. Education EdTech Twitter was a network for me. Things like uh, FemEd Tech was a network, virtually connecting the work by Maha Bailey and others on that, just getting stuck into doing things and volunteering for things and putting out kind of ideas and cause. And I've ended up kind of researching with other people who that I've read for years, that I've really respected for years, and been kind of found myself in that kind of position, which is really lucky. Um, but a parallel to that, and I would say, not just with researching and collaborating with others, I have kind of done my own research as well, that are kind of on an individual basis as well. And particularly if you're doing a PhD, you are plowing your own furrow there, and it's very, very important to make sure that you kind of have those two strands, I guess, to thinking about your research. Collaborative stuff where you can kind of play to each other's strengths, but also passion stuff that really drives you forward. And I hope you're all doing PhDs that inspire your passions.
That's great. No, thank you for that. And it was really interesting to hear that, about how the theatre stuff influenced. I remember you running a workshop on forum theatre at Alt-C, and that was really good fun, and a really interesting way of exploring things. Lorraine, would you like
sorry,
to?
this is probably just a really basic question, but I'm finding it really hard to like narrow down something to be researching because there's so many things out there. Any advice on how to, I really agree with networking and being part of the different groups. And I think almost feel like I've got too many fingers in different pies. And I'm at that stage where I'm like, there's so many things out there. I just don't know how to narrow things down or fine tune it. So any advice would be really gratefully received.
So, Lorraine, is this around you identifying your problem space, so your research questions, or is it?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that's where I struggled with that an awful lot as well. And even I did have a research question, but I wasn't sure whether it was the right research question for ages. And that's a very unsettling space to be in, and you have to sort of sit with that a little bit. I think the finding the things that are finding bits of literature that really speak to you. There's so much out there that actually sometimes it's finding bits of literature that really really speak to you, that try and help you narrow stuff down, and keeping writing, I guess, a little bit about those things that you're reading. And it is a process, and it's not something that's kind of going to be very straightforward. On a practical level, if you're not at a stage where you've designed a methodology or anything like that, you want to kind of keep it so that it's not too sprawling, I guess. And sometimes I suppose a theoretical exercise might be, okay, so if I was to investigate this, what would be my data? What would be the instruments I would use to collect that data? And how would I run that? So if there was a survey, or if there was questions, or if there was some sort of multimodal aspect of data collection, what would be the things that I would be asking at an operational level that would really inform that? So that might be just a kind of a sort of an imaginative exercise, thinking through those things on a practical level. If I was sitting in front of somebody interviewing them, what would I be asking them, and how would that answer that question? But I think then you're right. It is about narrowing things down. It kind of will come. You can talk to your supervisors.
Perfect. No, that's really great. Thank you. Thanks.
Yeah. Hi, Louise.
Hi, Shosha.
It's so nice to see you here. I got a question. I know you recently did some research on ChatGPT. I am quite interested in using ChatGPT in education, that sort of research topic. I just wonder, just curious, as an academic, how do you think the generative AI, for example, ChatGPT, has impacted on your own academic practice?
In terms of research?
In terms of both research and your teaching in that, open and blended master program. Both. Just curious.
Yeah, I mean, it's massive. We've only got a couple of minutes, Shosha. But so I think one of the things I do with my students is I introduced the idea that they can kind of get themselves an generative AI buddy to use for brainstorming, and I ask them to declare their use. I think in terms of research, education is one space, but research is another space. And actually, they're at different stages in terms of, I guess, acceptable practice and not acceptable practice. I'm sure that's been discussed loads within this group around what's appropriate use within research, and checking journals, and checking with your supervisors and your institutions as well. I think it's influenced in that it's been a source to examine as well, something to think about, something to research and explore in the digital education space. But it's also been something that I use fairly regularly, and I use different tools to try out different things, mainly text ones, not so much image ones. But I'm trying to do so in order to kind of keep aware of it as well, because I'm regularly talking to other people about it. I'm aware of time, Shosha, but I could talk about this for a lot longer.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much, Louise, for sharing with us today. We're so happy to have welcomed you to the series and share some of your expertise and insight and knowledge. So it just leaves me to say thank you so much, everyone, for attending as well.